Hello, everybody, and welcome to the afternoon tune. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm doing a nice special interview today for you people, interviewing the art director for X-Men 97, Roger Oda. How's it going there, Roger Oda?
Hi, afternoon.
Roger Oda here has worked on such things as Batman The Long Halloween Part 1, Motor City, as well as Symbiotic Titan as well. Is this the first show where you were a art director on it?
It is, yeah.
Okay. How was that?
Um, I mean, I've been a designer a long time. So yeah, it was a real interesting experience, stepping into a role um that was, like not just being a designer, but also, considering like I think a big part of the job is also sort of like collaborating, management, talking to people, things that don't necessarily um have to do with just designing. Yeah, but it was great. I'm glad to do it.
I gave a little bit of your resume. I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself a little bit more about your career, yourself a little bit there.
I grew up in the Bay Area, and always liked to draw. Obviously I got into comics. Marvel animation was a big influence on me because X-Men, that was sort of like the right time for me in the 90s, wanting to learn how to draw. I was really into Jim Lee and all the artists. And then I got more into anime and animation, Disney. Eventually went to college at Cal Arts. And from there, I've worked most of my career in television animation. Nowadays, that's streaming. But yeah, I worked on stuff like Motor City. You mentioned a couple of the projects, some of the other notable ones. I guess I've also worked on Shira, Vox Machina. Generally, I've sort of been in sort of like either action, that's the realm I tend to be in, as mostly a background designer. So sort of like designing worlds and sets, things like that.
Yeah, and I see you got a pretty good extensive resume here. Things like Metalocalypse, which was the Adult Swim show there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's really good there. That must have been really fun, like all that kind of crazy style, animation wise, kind of going on there.
Yeah, that was great. That was my first actual gig in animation, but that was like it was nice to get on a show that was like really out there, like they really wanted you to do fun, crazy designs. So it was a nice way to be introduced to animation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, very a lot of recognizable things. Rick and Morty, American Dad, Cleveland Show, there. So yeah. But you also done a lot of stuff, genre stuff there as well, with DC, DC superhero girls there, Legend of Atlantis there. That we mentioned Batman before, and you're currently, you did some stuff for My Adventures with Superman, which is currently also on right now.
Yeah.
You did 5 minutes of that, which is that's having its season 2, I think, coming out pretty soon. Yeah, so you said you went to Cal Arts there, worked there. So what was kind of the transition there from school to getting kind of your first big gig there? Like what was kind of there?
School is I liked school a lot, but when I graduated, like around 2000, wasn't a very good time for the industry.
Okay.
Uh, a lot of layoffs happened at the time. There's a lot of ups and downs, kind of like currently now. Like there's sort of like a lot of people being hired or a lot of people being laid off. A lot of people got laid off in the 2000s, early 2000s, and there was sort of like an adjustment period happening between CG and traditional at the time. So I didn't get in for a bit. Um, yeah, I just sort of kept working on my skills, and I was lucky enough to get in on Metalocalypse, which was when Titmouse was pretty small. That was like at the time it's big now, but the studio, that was the only show they worked on at the time because that was sort of one of their very early projects, and I was lucky enough to be hired at the time, and I feel like I got trained up pretty well by the people there, and it was a good experience.
Yeah. So this is Metalocalypse right here. Like I said,
Hmm.
very nice, very designs here. If nobody's ever seen the show before, very great things they do there. So this was your first big thing there. coming out. Yeah, and so with that, you said it's kind of a bad time, for the industry at that time, early 2000s. And I saw on your IG there looking for some things there. You also so you were part of the WGAW strike there, and you had a pencils down, fist up there sign as
Yeah,
well.
Animation Guild.
Uh,
Yeah.
so, what is kind of your opinion on that? Opinion on AI and a lot of that kind of push for that kind of going on, in the industry, there, as an artist yourself.
I mean, to put it, I am a shop steward for Marvel Animation, which is why I tend to have this background, just so people know when I'm in meetings if they have questions. I'm also on the executive board of the Animation Guild.
Oh, okay.
So I've been pretty involved. And, our negotiations are coming up
Mm,
later this year. So that is one of the top issues for everybody in entertainment right now. Um, and obviously, it's going to directly impact a lot of our members because, personally, as a designer, right? Like, there's concern that like artists, information was scrubbed from the internet. You know, so building blocks of AI were used from our members. So that's obviously a concern for them, like
mm,
when their livelihood depends on it. Like they want to get jobs and they've been sort of used to create the software. We want to make sure that people in the future can still work, and we're looking carefully, like into what the issues are because it's going to be different for everyone. But other IATSC people are negotiating right now, and we want to see how that conversation goes, with other unions also. That'll help inform us like what we should be doing.
yeah. And I know I've had some other animators, some other writers kind of come on and interview them. I interviewed one of the art directors from TMNT,
Hmm.
Mayhem there, and I asked him about crunch. Crunch is a big thing in the industry. You hear a lot about that. That's what articles coming out about like Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse there. They said there was a lot of crunch that the animators faced there. Have you ever experienced that in your career? A lot of crunch kind of going on?
I did um, early on in my career. There was a lot of uh, deadlines. It's interesting because as a now my role as a supervisor, I feel like that's part of my job is to help mitigate sort of things, right? Make sure that we want things to run as smoothly as possible. You can only do that as much as the budgets are. Fortunately, when we work for Disney, they tend to have a little bit more money. That that offsets a bit of it, which is nice. But there seems to be a lot of uh, crunch that goes on in every entertainment industry. I understand that part of it is like sort of cycling through, like trying to get the product right, like refining it, like going through boards, going through writers, different passes on it. But you always want to make sure that it's, like these animation takes such a long time, right?
Mm,
Like you always want to keep in mind that like you want people that it's like, it's that whole saying, right? Like you want to last the entire race, not just like do the sprint and burn everyone out. Like in order to make the season, in order to make the movie, we want to make things bearable for everyone. Um, and I think when you're a new artist, it's obviously easier to get exploited because you don't know what the bar really is or what's expected from you, and you're learning. When you're a more experienced artist, I feel like it's easier to judge, and like maybe you have a little bit more standing to like speak up for yourself. So,
mm,
which is why I get involved with the union, right? To sort of like have these discussions about what is acceptable and what is not. Like what do we think is a reasonable professional level and amount of time for things to be done. So,
yeah.
yeah.
What do you think are the top kind of issues for you in regards to being a part of the guild there, animation guild? You mentioned AI is probably a big part of that.
Yeah.
Crunch time is probably a big part of that. More pay would also be kind of very big there amongst the animation guild as far as the concern.
Yeah, I mean, for a labor union, pay is one of the core issues, right? That's like one of the basic things that is always going to be negotiated. Um, but I think AI is huge for everyone right now. Um, and honestly, like there's a lot of stuff. a lot of people are having a pretty hard time in the animation industry right now because there's not as much being made as there was a couple of years ago. So, sort of people want to know that they can go back to work and that they have good jobs, like stability. They want to know that stuff is going to be made here and not like outsourced, things like that. I think those are really like our main issues right now.
Okay. Oh, that's yeah, that makes sense there. The place you mentioned that there's not a lot of animation shows out right now. What do you think about the state of animation currently, and where it is? A lot of people kind of try to compare Western animation to Japanese anime. That it's kind of dwarfing that as far as popularity, attention wise. What do you think about the state of kind of Western animation currently?
I mean, I mean, I don't know. This is just from my point of view, but I've been fortunate enough to work on projects that I've been very proud of. Like X-Men. Obviously, I'm very happy with. Before that, Superman. I was happy with. Vox Machina. Like I'm fortunate enough. Maybe I have enough experience that like I've worked on shows that I think are of high quality. That the content is good, the writing is good. Um, I say that as someone who also is I love anime. Like that, I also grew up on it. So I also watch anime, but I know that their circumstances are very different than ours. Like that is a completely different country. Um, they also have their issues, right? Like people who are anime fans know that like there's a lot of sort of like issues with crunch and pay that also happen in Japan. This is sort of like an issue for everyone. Um, so we always want to see everyone do well. And to be honest, it's all sort of interconnected because the way that TV animation normally works is that we're getting animation outsourced a lot of the time. Like a lot of us do designs and we do the storyboards, but we're going to vendors in Korea and Japan, to get the show animated. And then, fortunately nowadays some of that comes back and we can get a little bit of in-house done. But we're always going to be at least for the last, you know, at least the last 2 decades, we've been sort of working with other vendors in other countries. So
Yeah, and
it's all sort of comes together. Yeah.
yeah, and for X-Men '97, so the animation studio for this was Studio Mir, which was a Korean animation studio.
Right. Yeah. And they're amazing. Right. Like they have their own list of like amazing shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a little bit about getting to the animation of X-Men '97. So, when people kind of first saw it, they were kind of impressed about how it kind of kept the look of the old '90s show, but kind of looked a little bit more up to date. Can you talk a little bit about the look of the show there? Kind of the decision to kind of keep it that style.
Um, I would like to say I'd like to clarify, like my title is art director, but I'm only one part of like this big visual team. Like Amelia Vidal was our head of character design. We have Chris Graff, who's head of like special effects. Uh, Jeremy Polgar is our animation supervisor, and we also have Anthony Wu, who's production designer, who's actually above me, right? Like we work together to make the overall look of the show, but it's a lot of people, a lot of different designers, and it's really a collaboration. I say that because a lot of people had input on how we got to the final look. Anthony especially, had a vision of how he wanted like the color and the comp and everything to come together. How we wanted the animation to play was also an important factor. Like, how do we get something to look, sort of reminiscent of the 90s when we don't use that technology anymore? Like, so we were talking about things like line quality, frame rate, things like that. Um, and I think everyone had, especially character goes through a lot of very over and over, like a lot of scrutiny designs. For me, background, at least that's my focus, or like the world building.
Mm.
I went back to the original show. And then when I looked at stuff from, X-Men, the original animated series, realizing that they were drawing heavily from the comics, and I love comics. I read the comics. So like I was fortunate enough that, we have this background of looking at the original show, also seeing what they were drawing from, which is, like more of a traditional ink line. There's like a very dark look to it because we're doing reminiscent of traditional comic book artwork. And there's a lot of people in our crew that, have backgrounds in comics, right? They can relate to that as well. Like Anthony worked in comics for a while. I know a lot of people that work both in animation and comics, so we sort of have that relationship where we even talk about the materials that are being used, right? Like, what was animation? How were they were using it back then? Like, '90s is interesting because we're still doing, traditional drawing, but there is a little bit of computer CG, like in the '90s. You get those rotations at the end with the CG models. So even that was being done then. So there was a lot of discussion that went on about what was appropriate for our show. Every time we would look at it, we're like, is this enough or are we going too far? Is this going to be out of, character for the show, or is this a point where we want to like go a little bit beyond? So yeah, there's a continuous discussion.
Okay. Did you have a finally seeing the show, did you have a favorite character for you that you saw there watching the show that was like, that was pretty great to see animated there, fully realized?
I mean, honestly, like that was sort of like the question when people joined, like, who's your favorite character? Like personally, for me, Gambit
Okay.
as a kid was always a favorite. Um, I think I was really interested to see how we could pull off characters like Mojo, because
Okay.
he's such like a big character. Like I was like, oh, like how's that gonna come across? Like can we make someone like him that's like kind of gross and complicated?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the interesting part for me. And of course, like because we also have effects, their own department, seeing people, like Jean Grey, like how are people going to look with their powers was always exciting to see, you know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think, with the, Mojo World kinda episode was really good. The Jubilee, that was the Jubilee, centered episode, and then when you first see Mojo, it's like he took, Ozempic there a little bit. He kinda slimmed down there, quite a bit. So that was nice to see with that character. I think he did some really cool things there. Um So you mentioned, really, inspired by comics there. You kind of see that influence on the show as well. You said you've kind of seen anime there. Also, you also see kind of some video game influences there, some
Oh,
moves
yeah,
from
yeah.
Marvel Capcom 2 there as well. What some insight on that there as far as that goes?
I mean, from my design point, that's also like kind of growing up for me was like the whole Marvel versus Capcom, and I know our directors too. Like that's kind of interesting because that kind of blurs the line a little bit, like with like Western animation, and then Konami and anime. Like you get these different versions of the characters, so that are slightly that are styled differently. Um, but that's an interesting aspect of the show anyway that I feel like is built in is that like even if we just stayed with comics, there is such a long lineage to X-Men. There's so many different styles they've been done in. Like the torch is constantly being passed to new artists. So
Mm,
like we started the show in a very specific because we can base it off the original show, but we're also aware that like this is not the only way these characters can be portrayed, even in just the drawn form, there's a whole bunch of different artists that have sort of done their take on it. Yeah, and video games was one of them. That's one of the realms that they exist in. So
yeah. And if people seen the show, I'm gonna go back and rewatch the show again. I've already seen it. I'm eager to go back and rewatch it for a second, third time there. And there's like a move that Rogue does that she does from the game.
yeah,
There's a move that Cyclops does that he does from the game. There's a move that Cable does there as well. So yeah, a lot of the characters here you will see inspirations there. And also just in the fighting sequences there, you also see some of that anime kind of influence there with some of that. Um, and yeah, I mean, did you hear anything kind of beforehand when the show is getting ramped up to come out? Any kind of criticism there that you go like, yeah, people have to watch the show first before you know what I mean? You can kind of come out and criticize it. Did you hear any of that a little bit beforehand?
I
Strong
mean,
criticism.
honestly, there was such one. It took a really long time to make the show. So we were at it for like a good 2 years. Um, but during that 2 years, it was a worry just because there was this Marvel. People were sort of losing confidence in the MCU itself, right? But
Mm,
like, but at least for us, we were kind of in this own our own little bubble because uh X-Men the animated series is its own thing. It existed before MCU. And that's the thing that we loved. So we hoped that like if we did this correctly, it could stand on its own. You know, like we weren't necessarily going to be held to the same. Um, it wouldn't a direct comparison wouldn't be fair. You know, like X-Men the animated series is its own thing. You know, has its own history, and we were fortunate enough that we were able to take a crack at it. You know, like oh, we're getting to do this. You know, before anyone else. Like it hasn't existed this way yet. So trying to not hear the negative stuff and just be confident in our own abilities to sort of like do something that we thought was good.
Yeah. And I will say the reaction to it has been overwhelmingly positive. You're getting a lot of great reviews out there. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, critic wise, there for X Men '97. Some people are going like, "This is saving the MCU. Even this is the best thing that's come out of the Marvel kind of universe since maybe Endgame." There, so that's very very high praise for it there. So yeah, a lot of people loving it. A lot of people can't wait for a season 2 of this show, me included. There.
Yeah, it's been crazy.
And I
Yeah,
think one of the episodes, correct, is now being trying to be nominated for an Emmy. Remember me there. Remember it. I think it's the
yeah.
episode that's going to be submitted for an Emmy there, which I think is also a really great episode. Do you have a favorite episode of the series there for yourself?
I just remember when I got to see the animatic for episode 5 and just being sort of like in shock. You know, like even at that stage, you know, being like, oh, are we gonna we're gonna go there? You know, kind of like I was already, you know, like impressed with animatics before, but yeah, 5 really stands out. You
Yeah,
know, everything in it from like but obviously Genosha and everything that happens there. It's and I'm gonna say like as far as moments, Genosha clearly stands out. The finale for me also kind of sticks with me. It's interesting because you know, I grew up with X-Men as a kid. Now I'm older. Now I have a kid.
mm,
Um, the whole way that they wrap up Jean, Scott, and Cable really hits different for me now because now I'm like a dad. So like
mm,
even when we were drawing those backgrounds, the diner scene where they're talking at the end, that really stays with me. I'm sort of like, oh man, like I look at Cable differently now. You know, yeah.
yeah. Any kind of advice for anybody there trying to get into the industry like yourself, trying to do more work on a lot of major shows there?
Um, I mean, right now in particular, it's a pretty hard time with even you know a lot of professional people. Um, but the best way that I've personally, the best way that I've found to sort of like level up when I was trying hard to improve was always sort of to give myself little projects. Like I'm not good at just you know studying for the sake of studying. You know, like as an artist, I always like to try and like make things. Uh, Either whether it's other animation or comics or like or help out other friends of mine that had projects, you know, like that was a great way for me to like learn and make connections at the same time. um, I think if you're really trying to get into the industry, like it's going to be a combination of your skill set but also you know just getting to know people, and that's a good way to do that. And get in with a good group of people that all want to help each other and you know like improve at the same time. um, I think before people would say like that's what school is for. You know, I went to college, obviously that's I think that's helped my career a lot, but I think there's a lot of different options now, you know, especially with online, like different types of communities that are formed.
Yeah. And I see I looked at your page here, so if you people can go to your page portfolio here, see a lot of all the background designs you did for the various TV shows that we mentioned before. And just thinking about it, probably was Rick and Morty the hardest one because that's probably like a lot going on background wise, with a lot of stuff kind of with the different universes, the different worlds. Was that kind of the most difficult?
I was I was on I think it might have been like second season of Rick and Morty. So I'm gonna say I think that show, the further it goes along, the crazier it gets. So
Okay.
I don't want to compare myself to the current designers. I think it was a pretty good job. I had a lot of fun on it. I really enjoyed being on it. But I think it's one of those shows that like the more they do, I can see it. It gets more ambitious.
Okay.
The more stuff that they can do. So I'm sure it's more challenging now than when I was working on it. Yeah.
Uh, What do you think about the you mentioned, like, some, people kinda getting in, working with each other that can help them kinda rise, help them get their portfolio a lot bigger. Do you think the rise of kinda indie animation, you think that's pretty good? Like, people doing the GoFundMes, doing the Kickstarters there to do small indie projects animation-wise. You think that's
I,
pretty good?
I and I've talked about this with other people in animation. Because of the way streaming is working now, right? Like there's obviously go-to, Netflix, Disney, but like even me, the way I consume media, you don't discount independent projects. You don't even YouTube, right? Like I consume a lot of stuff on YouTube. I love watching stuff made by people. I love having more personal connection. So I think there is going to be like a good element to indie animation if we can figure out, you know, the right projects that sort of reach that resonate with people. I also worked on Final Space, which was
Mm,
kind of more had more indie origins, right, and sort of became its own show. So I know it's possible, right? Like I know that yeah, just cool creative people, can get known and make things out of their projects. Yeah,
yeah, and this is, Final Space right here. This is the show.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you watch much animated stuff outside of the stuff that you do work for?
um, I do when I have time. I got a kid now, and but I try to consume like a good balance of like not just animation, but I'm also trying to consume like just for pop culture. What the live action everything is because I like to keep on top of that. So live action movies, live action shows, video games, and anime. It's kind of a lot, so I have to sort of pick and choose.
Yeah. What are you watching from each?
um, because of my kid, I sort of been, because I want to watch stuff that I can watch with him. We were sort of getting. It's not the newest thing, but like things like My Hero Academia.
Okay.
Um, and then on the, I've been watching Last of Us, and like I've been interested in how the video game stuff is getting adapted because a lot of that is getting shows now.
Okay.
That and Fallout. Uh, Movies, like the Godzilla movies are pretty big right now, things like that. Just trying
Mhm.
to see what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Career-wise, you wanna move on to maybe doing some other things other than animated shows? Wanna do maybe movies? You wanna do, maybe some work in video games possibly, some there career-wise, or you just kinda wanna continue this path for a while?
Because I said this was sort of my first art director role. So like I'm still interested to learn more and see what this sort of has to offer. Like I've been a designer a long time. Being a sort of designer slash manager is kind of different and kind of interesting. I do like talking to people. I do a lot of union work. I think that's
Yeah.
part of it. But yeah, but as an artist, anything that helps me sort of like, I'm really into like exploring worlds, like sort of, and asking questions about why we're setting up certain things certain ways and having those discussions.
Yeah.
So X-Men is rich with that. So I'm glad I get to do it. Yeah, any opportunity that allows me to do that would be great.
Yeah. And are you gonna be back for, the season 2 there as art director there?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying our best. We're still rolling through, which was great, because we're still working right now.
Oh, okay.
so, so to see the reaction from people is really motivating. I will say, right? Like, oh, good, people like the show. It helps us, like,
Uh,
make some more of it.
yeah. And, yeah, seeing how this show directly especially relates to the comics and how you guys have adapted those things, I think really impresses people. Some people even think this is the best X-Men media, outside of the comics, better than with the movies, better than the '90s show and other X-Men cartoons, so, you do have a lot of that kinda going on, with this, so, yeah, very, very high praise there, and just the way yeah, you're able to do the characters, and a lot of people, especially I think the MVP of this show for a lot of people is Cyclops, the way that he's kind of portrayed here in the show, especially being sidelined much how he was in the Fox X-Men movies. Did you see those the, Fox X-Men movies there?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and for me, it's kind of interesting, right? Because like, yeah, and they came out a while ago, and I was younger when I watched the X-Men movies. We've made, there's been subtle changes to Scott's character. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's the time of life I'm in right now, where it's also like having a family, thinking about responsibility. Uh, I feel like those are sort of worries that Scott has, right? Like,
Yeah.
so to me, he's more of a relatable character personally, also. Uh, like I've sort of alluded to before. So yeah, I'm glad that he came off well. Yeah.
Yeah. Great action sequence with him, where I guess the X-Men discovered. I guess he's making a lot of money as an X-Men member. He had a Porsche or a convertible there. I guess he's making quite a bit of good Professor X checks, I guess. And I see a lot of designing cars on your Instagram. Now, I don't know if you're a car guy there yourself.
I am.
Okay. Yeah, I see a
And
lot of that.
our prop designers are too. We like to talk about cars a lot. So
Okay.
uh, Scott's car was a lot of fun to be able to like, oh, we get to do his car, like. So there was a big, good discussion going on about what the car should look like. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. Any news you can give us about season 2 before I kinda let you go or end things here, that you are allowed to tell people?
I mean, just what people know is that like it was basically the same team, you know, like so season one people, season two it was basically us. We continued to go. Um, the story arc was sort of set out ahead of time, so it's us sort of like we just kept moving forward with the story. Um, and hopefully people like where it's going. Honestly, it's hard for me to judge as someone, like I said before, animation takes so long. uh Honestly, when the shows come out, I'm sort of numb to what's surprising or not, because I've sort of known for a long time what sort of like the stingers are going to be. So like it's interesting to see people's reactions, right? So like for me it's like that'll be season two, like, oh, how's that going to hit with people? Like the finale I thought was great, seeing people like see the ending bits. I'm like, oh, are they going to be into that? you know like but yeah, that's a the ending of season two is a hint of where we're going in itself.
Mm, yeah. Well, that's good. I think that's good people to hear. Like when they I heard about this and said like, is the same crew coming back to do season 2? I think that was a big worry for some people because you guys did such an awesome job with this season. And I think that was also great to hear that a lot of that is kind of gonna the same crew is going to be back again there for the second season. But yeah, I mean, it was very much a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Oda. There, I guess
Yeah.
yeah. One last thing, y'all handing out those X-Men shirts there, X-Men hoodies? Send one of those
Oh,
over.
I bought this myself. This is not.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, it was so rad. I had to get one.
Oh, okay.
Get a lot of comments on it, but
Yeah.
like for sure, we're like, now that the show's out, can we get some good swag?
Good X-Men 97 merch there.
Yeah, that's a good opportunity. We all, and because we're designers, of course, as we're making the show, we're always sort of like joking about stuff that could be made, right? Like, oh, this should be a thing. We should sell this, or like we should actually have these things for people to wear, like all the costumes and everything. Like, I was sort of joking about a line of like cable luggage wear because he has so much stuff, like.
Yeah. The Rob Liefeld pouches, Mr.
Yeah,
Pouchman.
yeah. Wouldn't you like to wear all the pouches, like in your
Yeah.
messenger bag?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be very good. I mean, hey, the man merce, there instead of hey, wearing a fanny pack, always get the pouches. Pouches are always
Yeah, yeah.
but pleasure talking with you, having you on. Can't wait for season 2 of X-Men 97, which is probably going to be on Disney Plus a while now.
Yeah, we're working hard on it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to talk. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.